All right, guys. Did you see the first Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz press conference last week? It was held in an empty American Airlines Center in Dallas. No fans. And it didn't feature the F-bombs and the trash talk between the two guys that you would have expected. Many felt that it fell flat in terms of creating a buzz for the August 5th boxing match. Do you agree with that, Goes?
Yeah, I think I have to agree with that. It felt pretty flat because I think it's still savable, but that moment's a moment that I think a lot of people were waiting for, right? Like you wanted the moment where they were going to be face to face. I thought there was going to be chaos. I thought there would be shoves. I thought the entourages would get involved. Water bottles, the Diaz go, the water bottles being thrown left and right. Jake Paul tried, man. He poked, he tried. Nate didn't really take the bait very much. So I think what scares me in this instance is I'm one of the guys that kind of had a problem with the way Nate Diaz had his exit from the UFC. He just felt kind of flat in that fight. But for me, my logic was, well, he probably has his eye on Jake Paul. He just wants to get the hell out of the UFC, and that's why he just looked like he didn't really want to be there. But what scares me is that same energy seems like it carried over to what's arguably the biggest paycheck of his career, Jake Paul. He still had that energy of, I'm just kind of here. I don't really care what people are asking. I don't care what this bozo's telling me. It was just, it didn't get you fired up. And how many times have I said on MMA Junkie Radio here, if you're not going to care, why should I care? That is my problem. And I think Jake Paul, he's so brilliant at times that I think he's going to figure out ways to get this going. And I think behind the scenes, they're probably going to have a talking with Nate that, like, come on, man, this is all about, nobody's really sitting here going, who is the better boxer? Like, we just want some of the drama. We want someone to get KO'd. But they need to kind of generate that. And I think Jake Paul's smart enough to figure out ways to maybe make that happen. And I really hope he does, because if things carry on this way, no fans, very dry, I don't know that I'm buying this. I don't know about you guys.
I'm with you, Goes. I felt like high school when we were told there's going to be a fight after school at behind the Jack in the Box. You go over there and then they're just swinging at each other with pillows or something. Like, no, man, I want the verbal warfare. And guess what, guys? Nate Diaz is getting a big paycheck. He's a co-promoter here. He had to be reminded in the middle of the press conference, hey, man, like let's get this thing going. He's off taking a piss. And then of course we find out that Texas is gonna test for marijuana. I mean, we're gonna have to tap dance around that one as well.
That was
So
great.
this one's getting, yeah, it left. It didn't create much buzz, that's for sure. Danny Segura, chime in, please.
Here's what's happening, and I think it's like a hard reality that Nate Diaz is gonna have to start facing. And I feel like after this presser, he's probably starting to realize this, and which is the following. And George, you somewhat mentioned this, but a lot of these guys, and I'm not trying to be here like, super pro UFC and fighter pay is a bunch of BS and is non-existent and all that, but people forget also the benefit they get from being inside of the UFC, which is that the UFC is a powerhouse at promoting. I mean, look, we were just seconds ago talking about Power Slap. We wouldn't be talking about Power Slap if it wasn't part of the whole UFC promotional structure. They send the emails out. They use their YouTube. They use their Instagram, Twitter to promote Power Slap. That's why we're talking about it. But the UFC has millions and millions of followers on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. And when you're blasting out free fights, when you're blasting out highlights, promotional packages, that promotes a fight. There's a lot of buzz around that. And not only that, but speaking internationally, they also got UFC Brazil, UFC Espanol, and all these other accounts in all these other languages. And you're already touching on other markets. And the fighter didn't have to do anything, didn't have to move a single finger, nothing. All they had to do is exist and have a highlight reel package in the company. And that's it. They're getting their face blasted across different markets and getting millions and millions to pay attention to their next upcoming fight. I think Nate Diaz is realizing that now out of the UFC, a lot of that falls on him. This attitude, and we saw that the same attitude with Kron Gracie. They kind of, they're from the same team, so they carry the same vibe. Where you show up to a press conference, you barely want to answer questions, or show in this, and still millions of people are going to get to know you because the UFC machinery is there. That is all gone. Once you're at the presser, now you got to do the legwork because you're self-promoter. So you got to talk trash. You got to get a nice fiery face off and not be all playful. You got to pay attention. You got to start sharing stuff on your social media, and you really got to get behind it. And I feel like, he's starting to realize, I think at some point in the presser, he said this presser's whack as hell. And Jake Paul, rightfully so, called them out and was like, you put this together as well. You're a co-promoter. What are you saying? So I think a lot of people miss that. Yes, there's issues with fighter pay in the UFC and all that, but a lot of fighters don't realize the exposure that they get from being in the UFC. Just a real quick parenthesis, a great example is Paige VanZant, right? Like she felt she could get her money's worth better outside of the UFC, but don't forget how she got to make more money than her contract through Instagram because of her, exposure. She got to Dancing with the Stars because of her exposure in the UFC. So again, I think a lot of people take for granted what the UFC machinery can do. And I think Nate Diaz is one of them right now.
Dan, before we get to you, let me throw something your way. I'll let you weigh in your thoughts and comments here, and then what I'm about to toss, and then we can circle back to the guys. What if, I think this card needs something to get lifted. How about Perry versus Till on the undercard, along with Serrano versus Hardy, before we get to the main event? Because, Jake Paul can say what he wants, but he's coming off a loss, and then Nate Diaz he likes to slap people and let the fist talk. He's really not much of a talker. Is this what it needs? Is two other bodies in there that can maybe carry some of that load, Dan Tom?
Yeah, I think it definitely wouldn't hurt, because just by seeing the press conference, I agree with a lot of Goz's and Danny's points to where, I know we're not asking for a prediction here, but kind of like Goz said and Danny said too, that he was doing a lot of reacting. Usually he's the one hitting the cowboy hat off of Cerrone, right? Pushing him and flipping him the bird on a big card where he's not even the star. That was what, Lesnar, Overeem, or whatever it was. And he kind of always had those show stealing moments. Like Nate was usually, the initiator, and with perhaps parlaying into Danny's point about that marketing there, without it there, it is kind of troubling, right? Because, I know the Diaz brothers were always all about that life as far as the recent clips we've seen in New Orleans. It's not something we want to see Nate do as he gets older and is now a dad, obviously. But yes, that is not new to the Diaz brother code. I'm talking about more of the inside. You guys mentioned earlier, I'm doing a revisit right now for evergreen content going back to the Big Fox era. And that's a really interesting era. Not only is that right after, right building toward the sale for the UFC, but how are they building that sale? They were using fighters who were traditionally underpaid, like Nate Diaz, to fight there, come and fight RDA. Remember when he was just like not inspired, when we kind of saw this, and he would kind of miss weight. Now, you're mentioning Conor going through that phase, calling for 185. Like Nate did that too recently, as far as, targeting his suitors, saying, hey, I may be suiting offers for 185 too. That's troubling as a Nate Diaz fan. I root for the fighters. I root for Nate Diaz. I'm as much of a fan, I guess I can be as a media member. I'm not a hater of his, but this is troubling, folks. And I don't know if I'm not a big fan of this stuff anyways. Don't listen to me. I'm Mr. Contrarian Curmudgeon. I get it. But at the same time, even with that aside, I don't know if I want to go put money in Mr. Privilege Paul's pocket just to see him, initiate on a very reactive Nate Diaz that we're already seeing reacting kind of behind the eight ball here. Kind of troubling. So, they could probably use more, especially if they want to get, the weirdos like me to buy in.
All right, Goz and Danny, do you think this card needs more? Maybe Serrano and Hardy need to get there. I don't know how catty they are or what they can be like, or maybe Nate picks it up in the next one. But do you think it could use that? That was one of the nice things about BKFC. We paid $49.95, and we had Perry versus Luke, Alvarez versus Mendez, and then we also had some big men Rothwell. We had the women's title fight with Christine Ferreira. Like there was more for us to get, for it to be appealing to us to finally go, all right, let's do it. Because it was the same month that we spent money on Garcia versus Gervonta Davis. So, sometimes I think you just gotta stack the card a little bit. What do you think, Goz?
I think all it needs is a shot of 5-hour energy. Just get that in. I mean, the fight itself, Nate Diaz and Jake Paul, those guys can make us want to watch that fight. They just have to show up. I mean, Jake Paul did, but Nate Diaz needs to wake up, and that's going to make us want to watch that fight. He needs to be the Nate Diaz of old. You can add more fights to it, and that's more fun for us, but they don't need it. They have a great main event. It's just not really delivering on publicity so far.
Yeah. 100% agree with Goes. What people are not going, this Jake Paul and Nate Diaz fight. Oh wait, now they added a good undercard fight. I'm gonna definitely buy it now. This is a boxing card. We know that we're getting a main event, and that's it. And that's it. And that's completely fine. But whatever money you think of investing in other fighters to spice up the card, grab that money to pay more editors, to pay more illustrators, make more graphics, have this thing become bigger on social media, and just have a bigger presence. That's what they need, because that's what they don't have now that Nate Diaz is fighting. Yes, Nate Diaz is a star with the UFC machinery. Without it, I think he's still obviously a big name, but let's not forget about the power that the UFC brings here.
Mm-hmm.
One last thing. I would just want to say it's funny that you guys are using words like sleep and wake up to a guy who perpetually sounds like he's between snooze buttons, right? Like, I mean, like that's like since tough. That's been Nate Diaz like in my head. And it's anyway. Sorry.
Well, I don't want to beat this drum over and over, but I pointed this out on another streaming Back Clique, or maybe it was the Junkie Radio show. But look at UFC 239. At the top, John Jones versus Thiago Santos, which turned out to be a great fight. It went to a split decision. Amanda Nunes versus Holly Holm, a champ versus a former champ, right? But guess what was the one that everyone was talking about? It was Masvidal versus Askren, and it was really more Askren and Masvidal reacting to it. So sometimes you just need that third ingredient. You know what I mean? And both of these guys are free agents, both Till and Perry, free to sign wherever they want. I know Till's battling some injuries, but he's pretty much said for the right amount of money, he will go throw some hands somewhere. Maybe Perry picks up a bag and then goes back to bare knuckle. Who knows? This thing's happening on August 5th. I got to imagine it's appealing to some of the people that are out there that can maybe get in here and help things out. Till, the English can always promote a fight, and Perry's got his style of talking some trash as well. So I don't know. That's why I threw it out there. We'll see what happens. I think there's more press conferences to come. Maybe they pick it up, invite some fans. I think I'm with Nate Diaz on that part, at least.
Yeah. We're also a little bit less than 2 months out. Remember that. I think the closer this gets, the interest will grow with that.
Mm-hmm. Fans are really important, though. They dropped the ball not having fans, because the fans are what make these guys react. The reactions that they give off of every slight that each guy gives each other, and I think that'll kind of wake up Nate Diaz, because Diaz brothers don't want to get punked in front of a bunch of people, and I think the fans are what kind of incite that a little bit. So I think you have to have them there to get that energy.
Well, they had media members there acting like fans trying to incite things. Does that count? Speaking of which, another thing that shocked me in Nate Diaz, like I'm with him. I'm that curmudgeonly old man where I'm like, the audacity of these kids. That's been my energy for the past couple of weeks. Believe me, not hating him there, but I was like, Nate, come on, man, you're out of step. You gotta be with this. Gotta be ready for these kids, man.
Yeah, he did say something about I'll see you outside, or someone's gonna see you outside. But it was pretty funny, man. That guy coming in on him. Apparently he's been let go though.